Do you like books? I mean, really, really like books? Then you're in the right place. Each week, your host, Sam Hankin, interviews the best of today's top-selling authors and the up-and-coming superstars of modern literature. This is The Avid Reader. Here is your host, Sam Hankin.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of The Avid Reader, brought to you by Wellington Square Bookshop. Our guest today is Gaia Bernstein, author of Unwired, Gaining Control Over Addictive Technologies, published by Cambridge. It'll be released later this month. Gaia is a law professor at Seton Hall School of Law. She writes, teaches, and lectures in the intersection of law, technology, health, and privacy. Her research combines findings from psychology, sociology, science, and technology. And that research has been featured in New York Times, Forbes, ABC News, Psychology Today, lots of other media outlets. So kids spend 7 hours a day on their devices, and that doesn't include school device time. Add 8 hours of sleep, eating, and their toilette, and they have about 2 hours left to watch TV. So parents are desperate. So what do? You set limits, you encourage other activities, you create device-free zones, you be a good role model, you monitor their use, you have open and honest conversations. Shouldn't that work? It doesn't. It didn't work with my kids either. So if it doesn't, then what? I mean, is it government and corporate responsibility that's going to do the trick? Is it going to get worse? You got 3D virtual glasses. You have Chat GPT, which generated my checklist this morning. I spend a good portion of my day now with Chat GPT, who I've named Geppetto. So is it solvable? And then the other question we may take issue with is, should it be solved? So we have the person here who I can grill on this conundrum that seemingly always comes with progress, in my opinion. So welcome, Gaia, and thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
So what about it? Should it be stopped? Why can't it be stopped? What are your suggestions for stopping it?
These are all very good questions. I'll try to answer them as we go along. I think the big issue is we never took a pause and thought, do we want this? We sort of gradually got into this situation. Sometime around 2009, we got our smartphones and we got social networks, and suddenly we were connected everywhere. We could do so many more things online. And we made very small choices. I chose to text my babysitters when I was commuting to work. And then I thought I'll answer my work emails, so when I get to work, I can be more effective. And I joined Facebook, and I thought I'm actually saving time. It turned out that all these small decisions were much bigger than I thought. And by the time I and many other people realized how much time we were spending online, we were already in a place where everything we were doing was connected to screens, our grocery shoppings, our social lives. And we never for a moment stopped and made an autonomous decision of that's where we want to be. Do adults want to spend 5 hours on their phone alone a day? Do we want our teens to be constantly online? There was never a moment for a pause. And I think we need to take this moment to start thinking of where we want to go and how we can do it.
Well, using you as the control, because you kind of do at the beginning of the book, and you talk about exactly what you were saying about how you essentially were addicted. And so using you as an individual, have you been able to overcome that addiction? And how do you do that, since you're still on Facebook, you're on Twitter, you have a blog, you have Instagram, you got to email your fellow academics. It's still got to take up hours every day.
Yeah, I think I'm more aware of what's going on, and I can make intentional decisions. Sometimes I have to work on an article, I have to work on my book. I basically put a timer for 20 minutes and I turn everything off and I write for 20 minutes. Then I check my email and I go on again. But there are times when I'm less intentional, and then I realize I just spend an hour and a half clicking on things without paying attention, from email account to email account, from blog to the New York Times and back, and where did my time fly? And that is the problem. It's not, even though we know more, and I do know a lot about this, we are fighting against text that's so sophisticated in the way that it manipulates us. It's very hard, apart from the moments where we really need to get something done, to actually change how we do things.
There's so many questions, each of your responses like engender in me, and I should be writing them down. But I mean, what's interesting is I was talking to a friend of mine and we saw this picture from the 20s, and it was a bunch of businessmen in hats and suits walking down the street, and they were all holding their newspapers, not looking at each other, just like your people in the coffee shop. And I'm thinking, is it really that much different? And isn't our whole culture based on manipulation, covertly and subliminally, whether it's a Liberty Mutual ad or whether it's me arguing in court or you talking to your students? You may think not. I don't know. What do you think about that?
These are great points. I mean, has something qualitatively changed, or is it just something along the same spectrum, something like what we've always had? So yes, when people started reading newspapers, suddenly they were separating themselves. And if we want to make even nearer comparison, let's think about the television. I mean, so much criticism have been brought up against the television. Kids are sitting, watching it all the time. They're gaining weight. They're not getting exercise. They're not reading. So the question is something different here? And I think it is because we were always doing something that maybe was not ideal, but two big differences, I would say. The first thing is that, at least when watching television, I call it the human bonfire. We were all watching the same thing, so we could talk about the same thing. Now we would be sitting in a room and we each look at a different screen, we each do something else, so we cannot talk. So we're not together. And this is obviously going in this direction, because the more virtual reality we have, the more we're going to be engrossed in this different reality from each other. So that is one thing. And the other thing, if you think about television, is television, yes, we watched it, there were ads, but it was not as manipulative as this is, because here, basically, tech companies hired psychologists and took well-known psychology principles and incorporated them into the design of the apps and the devices we use today. So I'll give you one example there, and there are many of them. One example is taking away our stopping cues. A famous soup experience where people were given a bowl of soup, regular bowl of soup, they ate it, but another group got a bowl of soup where they couldn't see the bottom. So they basically ate 70% more of the soup. That is what is happening online. Our stopping cues are gone. This thing called infinite scroll, which you see on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, there's never an end. There's never an end to the page. So we spend more time. You go on YouTube or Netflix, you have the autoplay. The next video, the next episode immediately starts. When our stopping cues are gone, we spend much more time online. So I think this goes beyond reading a newspaper or even watching TV. Something is different here.
Well, okay. So the stopping cues, it's bad. I can watch YouTube and it's YouTube shorts. So it's baseball, it's Denzel Washington movies, it's things that it knows and continues to know better what I want to see. And so it shows them, whether it's somebody cutting a log with a lathe or a machine that picks up a tree and chops it up, or a drill press that smashes things. It knows what I want to see. But, and I'm going to continue to try and play devil's advocate because that's how you learn. When I was a kid, when I was like 12 years old, I never did any homework, but I read constantly, as you can see. And I own a bookstore. So at 8 o'clock, I'd start reading, and I'd still be reading at 3 o'clock in the morning under the sheets with a flashlight. And my father would come in and yell at me, but secretly, I think he was kind of proud. I didn't get to sleep. So why was I better? Because that's what I was doing. What was I learning? What was I doing that was more human or more sophisticated?
I think the most human thing is to make our own decisions. You love to read. So you chose reading. You reflectively knew that that's what you were doing. Nobody was forcing you to do that. You were not being manipulated, but you decided to spend your time reading. Now, when I decide to go on Facebook for 5 minutes, I may decide to go to Facebook for 5 minutes, but things which are outside my control make me stay there for 50 minutes. And that is the problem. It's less about me and more about external manipulation.
But understanding, you can't look at a clinically depressed person and say to them, why can't you just be happy? It's the worst thing you can say, and it's really irritating. Or to an alcoholic, can't you just stop smoking, stop whatever?
Mm-hmm.
But what is different with what you're saying? Because you do have a choice. You can turn it off. You choose not to. So why are you paralyzed into this daily grind of absorbing things that are pushed at you? Why can't you be just an intelligent, good person and say, this is really dumb?
I think because you asked me before about myself and how do I do it and the fact that I know, I think the fact that, yes, we can stop when we want to makes it even more complicated because we think that we are always in control while we're not. So if, for example, I could never stop, even if I had a deadline coming and I had to submit something, I could not stop, then I would realize there was a problem. But now I think that I can stop. And that's what's confusing. And that's why I'm less aware of what's happening.
Yeah. I mean, you talked about, we talked a little bit about, you talk about a line in a coffee shop and no one's making eye contact and everyone's on their device. What's so obvious and bothersome to me is, as you know, when you go to a restaurant, it's the mother and the father and the 2 kids, and they have their iPads with the really rugged cases so they don't break them. And no one talks the entire meal. And the parents love it because their kids aren't being bad. So why can't you go back to what I said at the outset? I'll read them off again, because you talk about the parents being desperate, but are they desperate because they want their kids to love them so they don't want to discipline them? I mean, setting limits, taking the phone away, monitoring it. Why don't those things work? And shouldn't it be the parent's responsibility?
I think these things work. And I think when you take small kids to a restaurant, give them an iPad, you're setting norms which are problematic. And I'll give you, I can already see how this goes further. I was on vacation with my kids this summer and we were in the pool. And it was a family there, and the 2 little girls were in the pool, and the mom gave them this special pouch to put the iPhone inside, and she also had it. So instead of playing in the pool, they were playing with the iPhones in this plastic thing so the iPhone won't get wet. So these are the kinds of norms you can avoid setting. You can bring your child to a restaurant and give them some crayons so they'll spend some of the time with you and some of the time drawing. On the other hand, I don't think as kids grow older, once they hit, middle school, I don't think there's that much you can do. You can model, you can talk to them about it, you can educate them, but you cannot tell them, you cannot limit their time. They're much smarter than you are in technology. And you cannot tell them, do not go on Instagram when all their entire social life is on Instagram. It's just not going to work. And that's why I think you can do what you can to delay things, to give them technology later, not to create family norms which are problematic. But at a certain point, things have to change in the outside. In a sense, this constantly fighting, these family fights, these internal fights has been failing. I mean, we know that. Screen time has been going up, not just because of the pandemic, it's been going up the whole time. So the solution has to come from somewhere else.
I mean, 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, you couldn't look into a mirror and see your own reflection. And then I remember going to Disney World with my kids and lugging these 2 gigantic boxes in order to take 15 minutes of video. And now, now I just got my iPhone 14 with these cameras that stick out, which really irritate me because I just want a flat surface. But I mean, when I was a kid, all right, I'm really old. And when I was a kid and we had rotary phones, what if you had to dial a number that had a lot of 9s in it? Can you imagine any kid today looking at that and taking the time to dial 3 9s and watch the dial come back in a second or two? Isn't it just progress?
Some things are progress. And I think it's important to set it out. Some things are great. It's great for me that I can order my groceries online and that I can be reached wherever I go. And I don't have to worry because I know if something goes wrong, people can reach me. And all the information we have. I would never advocate going back to a screenless, unconnected world. The thing is, how do we reach a healthy online-offline balance? Shouldn't we have the right to think about what works and what doesn't work? Because it seems like all the pressure brought by the technology industry business model, which is based on maximizing our time online because they give us products for free, Gmail for free, Instagram for free, and they target advertising to us. For that, they need us to be online so they can collect our data and to stay there for longer so we can buy the services they advertise. So there's a lot of pressure for us to continue to stay online for as long as possible. And we're heading towards more and more time. If you think about smart cities, we're going to be connected everywhere. You won't be able to go to a pocket. There won't be a moment where you don't have to use your phone for something. So we're heading in a very specific direction. The question is, do we want to stop and take a pause? And I think I'm an optimist because I think there were lots of difficult things about the pandemic. But one thing that happened is, before the pandemic, I ran a program in my law school. It was an outreach program. My law students went to speak to students at the age when they got their first cell phone, 5th or 6th grade. And I spoke to the parents about having a healthy online-offline balance. And around that time, the only people who were really worried were the parents. And I think the pandemic changed that. More people felt how it feels in their bodies to be in front of the screen all day. They felt how it feels not to see their friends in person. And there are many more people who are aware now and want a change. And being aware is the first step. That, together with all the whistleblowers report, I think has brought us to a place where we can decide where we want to go.
Well, what if you look at it metaphorically as the biggest oil tanker in the world, fully laden, going at 30 knots? And basically, are you saying, and you have a storm, which is all this new technology coming at the opposite way to the ship, and you say, let's just turn this 90 degrees. That's what you're saying.
What I think we're already seeing, you mentioned ChatGPT just as we started. I mean, ChatGPT was released into this world with no preparation, and everybody's struggling now. The New York school system said no ChatGPT in school. Every university, every faculty meeting, that's all people are talking about. And they're realizing that this idea that progress is always better, that's what will enhance society, may not necessarily be good, or at least we have the right to think about what we want. Do we want ChatGPT in our lives? Do we want it to change the way our students, our kids learn? Is more technology always better for the process of learning? So I think,
go ahead.
I think it's basically, in a way, also, I think ChatGPT is a blessing because people are realizing what it means now. So what it means if we don't stop it, because we're losing control about a lot of things. We've lost control of our time. Now we're losing control over how we want our kids to learn, how we want our jobs to be, what parts of our humanity we want to give away to machine created texts. I think there's more and more realization that we have to gain control over this process.
Yeah, a realization, but using Chat GPT as kind of a nomen of this, not the one that Bing is doing or Google or Snapchat, because that's the reason why it hallucinates is because it's hooked up to the internet. Chat GPT is standalone. It's never been to Wikipedia. It's never been anywhere. It's just been fed all this information. I ask it to write a story in the style of J.D. Salinger, and it does. It doesn't do a great job. I ask it to write a limerick, or it pretty much does everything. Do I like it? Yes, I find it amazing. Is it going to encourage plagiarism? Duh. And is this like the Philadelphia school district doesn't have any money? Are they going to buy the anti-plagiarism software? No. So it seems like, okay, you ask it the question you're asked on the exam, and it gives you a better answer than the teacher could give. So how do we solve for that? How do we solve for X?
How do we solve for X? I think the problem is that this is already out there. That's exactly the issue. I don't know how we're going to be able to contain it, because you can't contain something that's been unleashed, basically unleashed into the market. I am not sure that the government can even operate fast enough to come up with reasonable guidelines to decide what to do. And if every school tries to make its own decisions, this is not going to work.
Well, the point of the book, to a certain extent, is suggestions on how we can stop this. Some of which, the pay as you go, 16 before you go on social media, government regulation, antitrust laws. But it's like, isn't it just like legislating morality? I mean, is it? And also, you have an 80-year-old president. You had Nancy Pelosi. You have another 80-year-old. You got all 80-year-old people. They don't even know anything we're talking about. How can they even intelligently begin to introduce legislation?
Well, I think there's some younger people working in Congress as well. There's actually, I think there are lots of proposals, both in state legislatures and in Congress, of what can be done. And so moving away from the issue of ChatGPT, which is so new that there's been little thinking about that, going back to the issue of screen time, I think we've erred when waiting too much at this point, because we have this is not a hasty reaction. We have over a decade of research, and a lot of research over the last 2-3 years, pointing, at least for children, at signs of a public health crisis in the area of cognitive development, in the area of attention, mental health, the combination of psychology studies, brain imaging studies, showing that kids who are exposed to excessive screen time suffer a lot. And so the question is, you have a generation of children who already spent over a decade in front of the screen. Can you really say, I am not going to do anything, I'm going to wait and see what happens? We already saw what is happening. And I think the time has come to do something. Now, what can be done? There are lots of things which I look into in the book, what can be done, what measures would be better or worse. But I think we're at a point where lots of things are already taking place. I mean, you have class actions all over the country, parents suing game manufacturers, suing social media for addicting and harming the mental health of kids. You have now school systems like Seattle, also New Jersey, suing because social media is addicting kids and the school system has to pay for the mental health costs. Very similar to what we saw with attorney generals and cigarette class actions. So there is a lot going on. I think we're past this stage of we're going to wait and see. I don't think we should hesitate at this point.
Well, continuing to try to push you into a corner. What about climate change? I just read that China's opening 3 new coal plants every month. I mean, it's a bigger issue because it's apocalyptic. We won't have to worry about screen time.
Yeah, I'm not trying to negate that climate change is a big issue. I definitely think it's a big issue, but I actually see a different connection between this and climate change. We're talking about the same generation. And
Sure.
This generation is going out there and saying, change things for us. I mean, we have teens who are suing the government for not acting. Changing for us, this is our future. The problem here is that they are not feeling what's happening to them. They don't know anything different. They are not able to go out there and say, stop this, because we don't want to live like that. And because they are unhappy, because they don't, the statistics show that they spend half the time interacting in person than kids did in the 1980s, partying far less. So, but they're not going to go out there and say that. We have, talking about morality as adults, the responsibility to act for them. And it's so easy. You mentioned earlier the family with the restaurant and the iPad. It's so easy to neglect them and leave them in front of their screens. But I don't think we can do that, because they're not going to act for themselves like they do to save themselves from climate change.
Well, it's like another thing. I mean, societies, there's so many different issues that are very similar to this. For example, I see it with my children too, or they have their own kids. I have 5 grandchildren. So these helicopter parents who have to monitor every moment and decision process in their kid's life. One kid's playing hockey, one kid's playing basketball, one kid's playing keyboard, and they're driving them all over the place on these travel teams. And I couldn't even conceive of spending 20 to 30 hours a week doing that. And, again, sounding like an old man, like my parents talked about my music. My mother in the morning opened the door, we left, and at dinner time, she called us back. And we were left to our own devices. It was fun. But I don't think, the difference between you and me is you're optimistic and I'm fatalistic.
Yeah, but I think there's something sad about what happened to this generation of parents, because yes, they're helicopter parenting, they're over-parenting. They try so hard for their kids, and then these very same parents are losing their kids and they don't know what to do. They have just spent so much time involved in the after school, and then they feel like they have to give them a phone, and they're right, they don't really have a choice because the social life of the kids are on these phones. And then the kid disappears into their games, or disappears into social networks. And it's hard. It also actually made the research harder, because lots of the impact that we saw of on mental health, it was hard to untangle the causes. Was it the overparenting that affected kids' autonomy, and then they grew up and became more anxious, more depressed? Or was it the media? And I think that's why it took a while to unpack the research. I think there's enough research out there now showing correlation between increasing suicide rates, anxiety and depression, especially for girls, and social media.
I've gotten in trouble because I have some friends, I go over their house, I never see their kids. I go, where the hell are your kids? Well, they're in their room, and that's where they are. They're not even going to come out. I'm invisible. I am invisible. There is no social interaction necessary for them. But this generation, you're talking about kids now, COVID kids, maybe between 8 and 16. How do you think that you're going to be able to implement, or how do you think society is going to be able to implement enough change that it's going to alter what's already happened to them?
It's very hard to alter, and it's very hard to have a controlled experience to alter, because you can't take screens completely out of somebody's life. The screens are everywhere.
Good luck with that.
Right. So you can't even sort of say, okay, we will take screens away. So you can decrease them, but you can't completely change the situation. You can try to take some things out of their lives. But what I think can be done, and also because I think legal changes would not happen overnight, I think it will take time, we can try to work towards changing social norms. So while I tell parents, you cannot just continue to monitor your kid into late middle school and high school, I think parents and people can do things. Whether parents, for example, they have a lot of influence on schools. What's happening in schools now is pretty hard to believe. All considered, all the research we have, we still have federal policy that says more technology, the better. A laptop for every child. Even the mega studies that looked into that showed that this did not really help learning outcomes, that kids would learn better from people. It didn't even close the gaps between populations, which is something people hoped would happen. And then you add to that the harmful effect of screens. And after the pandemic, we have much more of it because teachers are used to it now. They teach with Roblox and Minecraft. They put their lectures on TikTok. And if your kid is doing Minecraft at school, it legitimizes it. You can't tell them to get off Minecraft at home. So I think we can do a lot to change how things are happening in school. Because if there's less screen time in school, if you assess whether technology is good before you use it, then there'll be less at home. And if you prohibit cell phones in school like France did, and kids have to interact in person during recess, they'll learn better and how to interact with each other in person. There are lots of things that can be done in the meantime on, community basis. You own a restaurant, you don't have to have a QR code. Because when you have a QR code, the first thing that happens is people take out their phone and the phone stays there. You can have a regular menu. There are lots of decisions that every person can make to change the norms in the way we live that would make some difference until hopefully there'll be bigger action and more pressure on tech companies to change the way they use addictive designs.
Good luck on the QR code. They're everywhere. They're on TV now. You just point your camera at the TV. I'll tell you something that works. My daughter, Katie, who's a pain in the ass like me, when she has a party, she has a wicker basket at the front door, and you can't stay at the party unless you put your phone in the basket.
Wow, it's impressive.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like you're looking at it like this big picture where there needs to be something done, like something needs to be done about this. And I look at it like, okay, well then, think globally, act locally. That's what she does. And maybe because she does it, people have a better time. And then they realize, oh, this is a good idea. But
it's amazing she gets people to agree because people feel like they can't because somebody will look for them. I remember I went to a meditation retreat and they collected the phones and I got so stressed. I said, what if somebody needs me? And they promised me I can check my phone during the breaks.
It's so funny because I've had a cell phone, a bag phone, since 1989, and every other device I've had. In all that time, and with email and everything, I've never gotten an emergency phone call and I've never gotten an emergency email, which makes me very happy about my life, but it's also true.
Yeah, it is true. I think for parents, though, it's harder because the expectations from them are to always be available. So if you're not available, you feel very guilty and people look for you for smaller things than when I was a kid. Like if I was sick, the school would keep me there because they couldn't even find my parents.
Yeah. Well, there's pros and cons to that. And there's two different kinds of parenting. I mean, I overprotect. I always have. My brother with his kids, we'd go to the baseball game and I'd say, where's Noah? And he goes, oh, he's around here somewhere. And he would just wander around a stadium with 70,000 people. And I guess he could have gotten kidnapped, but he didn't. And maybe that made him a better person.
Yeah.
People, and that you talk about choice. So people have those choices too. But I guess where our bifurcation is this. I'm saying what I said earlier, that if we're talking about the kids, not the adults, that it's the parents' responsibility primarily. And I'm afraid the parents think that if they do that, their kids won't love them anymore. That's the way I look at it.
You know, I'm concerned about the responsibility being on the parents. The parents can do, as I said, things when they're younger, the kids are younger. But what is going on now is a bad situation because parents blame themselves and they're fighting an impossible battle. And I'm not saying parents should not do anything. I think they should try to do what they can, but they should stop blaming themselves and try to think what they can do collectively and less what they can do at home. And I think that's how the tech industry would like us to see it, because they want us to believe that we are responsible. The same thing happened with cigarettes. Cigarette companies argue that smokers chose to smoke. When smokers sued the cigarette companies in court, the companies argued you chose to smoke, you're responsible. And same thing with junk food. When a group of teenagers sued McDonald's for being overweight, for diabetes, McDonald's said, you chose to eat at McDonald's, you chose to supersize, you're responsible. And in both these cases, courts accepted these arguments, at least for a while, in the cigarette story. So this is exactly what the tech industry is already starting to do. We're choosing, and parents are responsible, and hey, we're giving you tools. We're giving parents all these parental controls, which surprisingly do not work so well. They do not separate schoolwork with personal work. They change all the time. They sometimes make it easier for kids to find the codes. They give us devices, like they give us screen time so we can see how much time we spent on our phone. They give us the option to limit our apps time, but they don't change the really addictive features they have there. What they want us to think is that we are responsible, we are in control instead of them.
Well, okay, well then let's tick off. In the latter part of the book, you come up with some potential remedies for the situation, not remedies, amelioration. And so wanting, I mentioned a couple of them, but rather than me doing it, which I tend to do, why don't you tell us some of the proactive stances that you posit in the book with regard to governmental regulation, antitrust, all that stuff?
I think there's several general ways to influence. One is through exerting pressure on tech companies to redesign their products. And this can be done in many ways. It can be done through litigation, through class action, which I mentioned we already have quite a lot of class action going on. Now, failure is not necessarily failure. It's already pressure. It's money going into litigation. It's bad PR. So it could happen through the Federal Trade Commission. They are looking at something called dark patents today. These are patents used online to manipulate us. They have not targeted manipulative addictive patterns yet, but they could definitely go in that direction. So there are things or legislation which could prohibit addictive features. And then there are other actions which could put pressure on the business model, because the business model, as I mentioned earlier, is using our time and our data as a resource to target advertising. So antitrust action against big tech may mean that Meta now owns, for example, Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. If antitrust action is successful and it breaks them up eventually, there could be more competition, more innovation, maybe different business models. Maybe a business model that does not use our time as a resource, but uses subscription or a pay-as-you-go. So let's say you go in a social network and you pay for your time. I think people will spend less time when they realize they have to pay for every few minutes they spend there. So that's one way to change things, through exerting pressure on the design or in the business model. Another way is spaces, changing spaces. So some spaces are just basically created for overuse. If you, in New York City where I live, every airport has 4 iPads at every table. You cannot escape the iPads. You cannot have a conversation. That's a design for overuse. You can design things differently. You can think, when you create smart cities, put the issue of overuse as part of the factors that help you decide how you want to design things. So I mentioned schools before. Schools are very, very important. How do we want to use technology in schools? How do you want to use technologies in businesses? There are lots of ways to change the way we live, and not even directly impacting the design of the technologies, but how we use the technologies.
Yeah, I can see. I can see almost in an architectural context how that could be done. I don't know if would be a groundswell of people that would want to do that or would be in their economic interest, but it makes a lot of sense. But I guess, as I said at the outset, look, we live in a country that has very little civil discourse now. If Republicans continue to make inroads and get crazier and crazier, all of your ideas, I think, would probably go out the window. But that's just a minor part of what will happen if DeSantis or Trump gets reelected.
Yeah, well, I mentioned before that I'm an optimist, and it seems to me that there's one area where we're seeing bipartisan support, and actually it's all these bills that have been brought, especially the ones to protect children, which I think is the Achilles heel of all of this. They have support by both Republicans and Democrats.
True.
And it's been going on for a while, so I'm hopeful this will continue, and eventually these bills will go through despite all the lobbying from tech companies.
What about something like, say, DraftKings and all the other FanDuel and all the other gambling sites, which are so horrible because people who can't afford are using money that they would spend for food for their kids. Yet there is no regulation. In fact, the regulation is getting more and more lenient. And that's just a subset of what we're talking about. I know kids who work for me in the bookstore that do DraftKings, maybe $50 or $100, but they still fantasy football.
Right.
It's like everywhere.
Right. And I think that what I'm trying to do is to look at the slice of the problem. There are lots of problems going on, and I'm slicing. But one place where things connect and we can see things changing already is loot boxes. Loot boxes is this addictive features which exists in games, something every kid knows about. Very few adults ever heard about this. So in many games, what you have is something it's like a surprise box. It could be the shape of a llama in Fortnite, but you can get extra powers or extra points that you might need to win the game, but you don't know what's inside. So you encounter one of these surprise boxes and you open it, you might get what you need. And the thing is, kids who want to progress more can actually purchase these so they can progress faster. So that's when basically kids started spending tons of money on these games that they were addicted to. And that's how the first litigation started, raising the addictive features of the game. But suddenly kids and gambling, and money came together, which sound like gambling, and things started changing.
Excuse me.
Outside the United States, basically regulators have restricted use of these loot boxes. The FTC discussed it, has not done anything yet. And we have a lot of litigation about that. So far, parents have been losing, but it's more and more pressure because it's bringing to light all these addictive features in the games. The game makers don't want to get to discovery. They don't want anybody to see what they're doing. So all of these things together are bringing us somewhere. So even if things have not moved yet, they are changing. And this is an area where international change does matter as well, because this is not about a hamburger. This is about data and programs in cyberspace which affect people living in different countries. So I think I think there is hope for change, but it's important, if you look at the past, the battles against cigarettes or food, not to expect things to happen overnight and not to expect things to change through one magic pill. It's not going to happen like that. But to see that all this pressure put together will eventually lead to change.
I went to CVS drugstore this morning for my cold, and I'm looking at the gift cards, and there's gift cards for Roblox. It's like, okay. But, again, other side of the coin, one of the girls who works in the bookstore, she's been playing Minecraft since she was 4 years old. And now she's able to code. She can code because of Minecraft. 11 of the top 12 entry-level jobs in this country after college involve coding to some extent. So she's kind of preparing herself for a career.
And so Minecraft is an interesting case study, because Minecraft was sold as an educative game for parents. At the same time, I think it was Wired magazine that named it the most addictive game of all time.
Oh, yeah.
So
it is.
So the thing is, yeah, maybe she learned to code, maybe she'd have learned to code for a class in school, but what we do know, and that there's so many kids who start playing this game, and when their parents start telling them to stop, they get furious. They get physically furious. They get so angry. These are the kind of symptoms that we see listed for addiction. Or just played without sleeping, without doing any schoolwork. Another thing they do, they spend all the time watching YouTubes of Minecraft.
I know. My grandchildren do that. And I say, this is the stupidest. And I yell at them. I say, how can you be watching? It's so stupid. And that guy sounds like such an idiot. Did you read the story? I mean, I'm sure you did. A few days ago, when that 6'6" guy who was the teacher tried to take the video game, his Switch away from him, and he beat her, and she's in the hospital. And you talk about that. You talk about how things get to a point, just like they would with a drug addict, where he'll kill somebody. A mother will put her baby somewhere in order to get money for this. And I will give you this, there is a tipping point, and there's a really scary tipping point where you lose sight of what is reality. And you talk about this, and yeah, and that's going to continue to happen with virtual reality for sure.
Yeah, and I still want to draw an important distinction. I think there are cases like that. There are kids who get really addicted. They qualify for what the World Health Organization defined as a gaming addiction. They play so much, they lose track of their schoolwork, that nothing else seems important to them. It goes on for a long time, and some of them end up in rehab centers. That exists. But what concerns me is that for so many others, there's what I call overuse. Maybe they would not qualify. Maybe they don't have all the symptoms, but they do have some of them. And there's so many kids who are not going to beat anybody up, but are just going to get so upset when they lose their iPad, and they'll spend the whole evening looking for it all over the house. So these things are very, very common, and that is the problem.
The best thing about kids is they always lose their chargers. They always lose their blocks. They lose their chargers. That's the only way that would be one way to do it. Take away all the chargers.
Right. Yeah, that is true.
I must have like 10 of those blocks that I bought in bulk in order to make, because they always lose them constantly.
I have no idea where all these chargers go. I buy them all the time as well.
Well, as we conclude, why don't you show us the cover? The book isn't out yet. I think, is it March 28th? Is that today?
Yes, it's March 28th.
Yeah. So it'll be in the bookstore. It'll be on the front table, but show us the cover now, if that's the actual cover. Yeah, it's a great cover because it does show what things are and what things might be.
Yeah. My kids actually helped me choose how it's going to look.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Gaia. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I hope I haven't irritated you by taking opposite positions at times.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise. So long.